could be your sanctuary if you're ready tonight. I know that it's all so heavy. Won't you let me inside? 'Cause I could be your sanctuary.
What's up guys, hope everyone is doing well. In today's video I'm going to be going over some updates for Bitcoin, then heading into the New York Stock Exchange and the 7 altcoins that I've been going over in my recent videos. After going over the technical analysis of this video, at the end I'm going to jump into Sigmoidal functions, more with respect to the adoption rate of Bitcoin over time, and then also logarithmic functions, which is in reference to the actual progression of Bitcoin's price over time. I'm also going to be talking about the halving with respect to that, because it's all pretty much a part of the same contextual bubble. But to go ahead and get into it here for the technical analysis here on this update on this weekly chart that I have been going over recently, what I mainly want to point out here is, if I go ahead and zoom in, we can see we have successfully, with this recent breakout that we've seen, completely broken out of this bottom range right here, which again, this goes back to finding support right at the very top of the previous cycle high back at the end of 2017. So what I want to point out here is, as you can see, we have successfully broken out right into the middle of this band, so this black one that I'm referring to, which is a part of the, I think it's the pi cycle indicator if I remember correctly now. Okay, so it's a part of the 350 daily moving average, so the band associated with that. And what we can see here is, again, we're right in the middle of it. The bands are as tight as they have been ever since, all the way back pretty much right here when we got this relief rally into the double top. But what I want to point out here is the similarity going back all the way to the rally we saw from March of 2019, part of the first phase of Bitcoin's overall cycle structure since inception. Again, I will have cards linked at the beginning of this video. The first video will have me more elaborately going over what I mean by phases and the cycle system that I hold to be the most logical way to look at Bitcoin, because it factors in not only the way that the price chart obviously looks, but also the halving, which is an inherent aspect of the mathematics. So basically, the crux of my phase cycle theory for Bitcoin's logarithmic price progression over time is tied to the mathematics of the technology itself. But outside of that, again, going back to this right here, you can see we're getting a similar situation, I believe. Like I said, you can see right here, after we set this bottom right here, we pushed up towards the middle of this band, essentially, again, this black band. Saw some cool down a little bit right here. Go down to a lower time frame real quick. Let's see if the 4-day suffices. We'll go down a little bit lower. So if we go down to the daily, you can see, so that's what I'm pointing out. It also just looks very similar. You can see we went up right here, came down, went back once more, then came down again as well. Let's go ahead and go back to our current time on the same time frame. Not exactly the same, but very similar. You see we had this first move up and another move up, coming down again. We're right smack in the middle of this band once more. Let's go back here just to take another look at it again. You can see very, very similar right there. So going back to this weekly chart, pulling these drawings back up, we are getting, again, like I've been mentioning, we have been seeing a bullish divergence ever since around June of last year. So it's, at this point, it's about 9-10 months bullish divergence. I drew this white line on here, so this white squiggly line, which is supposed to mean how I saw the RSI going. I drew this, obviously you can see I drew it when we were back here, and so far it's obviously very accurately played out. So what I believe is what we'll likely see here is a test coming back down to obviously just this orange range, but maybe we'll come down a bit lower down to this red one. But what that ties into here, as you can see, going back to the March crash, you can see we came up, hit this orange range, very similar to what we're looking like right here currently. Again, you can also see it's kind of just coming up and testing this white dashed line on the RSI, but you can see how I like to believe that we will kind of just stagger off in this mid area before we finally get that next parabolic movement. We go all the way back to the previous cycle, the second phase, which is going from 2013 down to this 2014-2015 bear market all the way up to the high of 2017 up here. So again, we'll just see something similar. Once we started to finally, we got a bullish divergence this entire time, broke towards the upside, straddled this middle range, essentially all the way to the all-time high, but you can see with each of these peaks, we had this upper blue range down here on the RSI, which is, again, I believe what we'll see similar right here, as you can see. I mean, it's essentially what we've seen every single time going back to all of these highs during each of these cycles. But for the price here, again, on this weekly chart, either we will see, as I've been mentioning, if we continue to go drastically lower than the already, I think, like 21.2 or 3,000 price value, the lowest so far. If we start to significantly break below 19.8 to 20,000 with volume support behind that, etc. And then especially if we start to lose about 18,000 to 17.8, likely we're going to, best case scenario of the worst possible scenario, come down and just retest the previous lows, no lower than around maybe 15.4, 15.5. But let's say we see something similar to the March crash right here, as like a final black swan on top of the already black swan event I believe we saw with the FTX crash, lining up right here when we got this bi-cycle low, which is just interesting because we got a black swan event. I mean, this right here was a black swan event. It lined up with COVID. If I remember correctly, I think back here this low was it had to do with Mount Gox. If I'm wrong, then it was this bottom down here that had to do with Mount Gox, and I just don't remember what the other black swan event was, but typically we've seen those at every single one of these bottoms just about. This time around it might be, who knows, maybe something goes down with Russia and Ukraine, or just something other going on over there. I don't know. But if this does happen, I believe if we do go lower than the lowest low we've already set, then we would go down and meet this kind of range right here of confluence. Again, going back to this curvilinear falling wedge is essentially what it is, which would line up with price going down to worst case scenario around 11.4 up to around 12.8 thousand, meeting this pastel green, this light green band, or moving average for this 350 daily moving average band, which is essentially, I mean, it would line up with where we got this first low set right here. So plenty of things point to that being the likelihood if we continue to go down drastically from here. But if we continue to go upwards, before I get to the, actually I'll just go ahead and jump into the lower time frame. So here, if we take a look at this daily chart, again, I'm gonna go ahead and go to the 12-hour here. So as I was pointing out in my previous video, this white falling wedge right here, so was looking nicely. We saw this fake out essentially. Now we've broken back up. We saw this point right here, which could act as, I see it at least as a point of retest. I mean, we didn't retest this trend line, obviously, like on the dot. If I were to move this up a little bit higher, I most likely did. Let's go ahead and see here if I can even click it. If I move it up a little bit more, yeah. So if I move it up like that, that actually more accurately brings it into finding actually a retest right there. And now we're coming up into this second one that I drew, which this one pertains to this 4-hour chart right here. So this, again, so this black based falling wedge, falling triangle. We can see right here, we've broken out of it right here, so this might be a good thing. If I actually go down to these lower time frames, so here on this hour chart, we've seen a nice bullish movement towards the upside so far. We aren't printing any bullish or bearish divergences or anything like that significantly. We are seeing some cooled down some sort of resistance along this 200 moving average right here. Again, that's just another very important moving average. Going down even lower. Still not seeing any major bearish divergences or anything. If we go back to this 4-hour chart right here. So if we come down and meet around, as I've been mentioning, 21.5 thousand has been the sweet spot. So far we've come down and we've met at lowest, I think it was 21.364 thousand. We've essentially met this price target of this yellow right here. So this yellow dotted trend line at around, went down to 21.1 thousand. As I said, we've essentially met that. That is what lined up with taking pretty much the retracement right here. So the most drastic retracement. If I were to take about the second most drastic retracement, so this one instead, we have actually met that on, like, quite literally. Let's go and zoom in a little bit more here. We've met that literally on the dot with the slightly more conservative one. I won't go any lower because that means we've already would have met it as well. So there's plenty of reason, I would say right now, to believe that we will be continuing to go up from here, especially if on this 4-hour chart we continue to break above this band once more, which at the highest right now lines up at 21.3. So if we start to see Bitcoin with volume support, etc., strength towards the upside, breaking above 22.3, 22.4 thousand, which up to 22.5 thousand as well. That is just generally what lines up with this area right in here. So again, as you can see, this was major support. We would need to push up to this and break above it to find that right there. So if we do continue to go down, what I have right here is so this one is taken from right here. If we continue to go lower, this would line up with going down to and meeting the 21 pretty much. So this yellow retracement from this pattern up here, which would nicely line up with the overall descending support we're seeing right here, more on this shorter time frame of these two lows we set with our pink vector candles. We did get a very subtle, I guess not necessarily even a very subtle, but we got a bullish divergence right here. The price slope, obviously you can see, is negative. RSI was positive, stock RSI, and so all three of the indicators were positive down to the MACD. So if we see that, that could be nice validation right there for that outcome. And overall in general, for these two fractal patterns that I'm pointing out. So the second one right here comes from our most recent drop. If we see something like this, it's going to actually come down and meet this black trend line right here, which is what lines up with the trend line. Actually, let's go ahead and go back to that other chart that I skipped over because that has it on it. So this yellow trend line range right here, this lowermost yellow trend line, so this yellow dotted one right here is what lines up with this black trend line right here, which has its two pivot points of the 69 and $48,000 rejection. So it's the final trend line that needs to be broken and found support on, and then continue to bounce towards the upside to really affirm and confirm at the very least a relief reversal, but what I believe is actually going to be a overall total bull market reversal, assuming that happens. Which, if this does happen, we go down and meet this trend line. As I mentioned, even if this first pattern right here happens instead, overall what we will see here is a lower time frame impulse to the downside, so bullish impulse. Whether or not we go right here or down here, we'd see 5 moves towards the downside. So that's also nice to see, as well as an execution towards the downside to then flip back towards the upside. Whether or not which one of these gets met, it doesn't really matter, as long as we continue to go lower in that regard. Again, if we start to significantly break below 20,000, 19.8 thousand, that's likely going to signify, I mean, we could come down to that, like maybe we just come down a little bit lower, something like this. But it also is lining up with this 200, or not, my bad, not the 200 EMA, but the 800 EMA. Right now we're getting support along this 200 EMA moving average, so this white one. And we've already gotten the crossover right here, which would be a bullish crossover on the 4 hour. If we go to the That's the 1 hour. I don't care about that. So if we go to the 12 hour right here, we have not seen that crossover yet for the 200 EMA above the 800 EMA. Whether or not we continue to go down from here, a little bit lower, as long as we don't get that massive bear trap down to like 12, 11,000 as I was mentioning, or maybe even, if we go lower than so the bear trap will be down to our previous lows. We've already said around 15.4 thousand. If we continue this bear market down into another black swan type event down to 12 to 11,000. But then going back into what I was saying is so if we don't do that and we continue to go towards the upside from here, this next bullish upheaval back up above 24.3 thousand will then likely ensue this 200 EMA on this 12-hour chart crossing above this 800 EMA, which is basically what we're seeing here as a domino effect. We've seen it already cross over on the 4-hour. Next milestone would be the 12-hour, and then above that would be the daily, as you can see right here. We'd likely, if I had to guess, the next movement towards the upside will find some resistance around this 800 EMA. As price goes up, the 800 EMA is going to go up a little bit as well, as I've been mentioning on the higher time frames. The next area on the weeklies are showing more towards around 27 to 28,000. If you go down to like the 4 days, the fractal pattern, according to my theory on Bitcoin's logarithmic regression, is pushing more towards like 32 to 35,000. In general, I think the next milestone is 28 to 35,000, and that's like seeing wicks to 35,000. It would more likely be 28 to 32,000 more solidly. But going back to this weekly chart right here, likely we'd come up and we'd meet that area. Then after that, we'd push towards around 35,000. Again, if the daily, look at this, which I don't have it pulled up on here anywhere, I believe, yeah, I don't. Then the second milestone could be pushing more towards 40 to about 42, 43,000. As I did mention, I don't really, in my previous videos, I'm not really sure which of those two routes will be taken. I did mention in the past that I was leaning more towards the lower, like the daily one, so around more towards like 32 to 35, and then 40 to 43,000. But I'm going to change my mind this time around, and I'm just going to lean more towards this weekly chart right here, which is, like I said, more towards 28,000. We'll sit there some more sideways for a little bit, and then we'll break towards 30 to 35,000. Also validating this, again, like I was mentioning on this daily time frame of this 800 EMA. As price goes up, this will go up a little bit more, meeting that 28 to 29,000, and we'll likely get entangled with this 800 EMA here on the daily. But that pretty much wraps up what I wanted to go over for Bitcoin. If we take a look here at the New York Stock Exchanges, I've been mentioning we're getting, for quite some time, a bearish divergence going all the way back to the A of this M pattern to this C. We've been seeing it going all the way back here. Let me put a bubble over it, going all the way back here as well, up to this right here. We've been seeing another bearish divergence, as you can see down here, comparing that to price. It's been negative. As I've been saying, I do think the decoupling is ensuing unless the New York Stock Exchange pushes up into this box and significantly starts to break 17,000. Then that's likely going to be wrong, unless we're seeing a major bull trap here and then it continues towards the downside. But right now, it found support along this range that I set not too long ago. Seeing price for the New York Stock Exchange go below 15.7 thousand is going to continue to confirm. Seeing this move towards the downside, as I've been mentioning, whether or not it moves towards the upside or the downside, something pretty pivotal is going to happen here soon, because you can see how tight this band is getting here for this 350 daily moving average band. So something is definitely going to happen here. If I actually go back, because I'm kind of curious, it has flipped black, and whenever it starts to flip black, that does mean it's going to go towards the upside. But at the end of the day, we could just as likely, especially if the price continues to go down, this upper line of this band could go back below this lower one, and then it's going to flip white and then continue out more momentum towards the downside. Again, I think if it does continue to go down and then decoupling starts, and what I'm saying actually ends up happening, I think we'll go down towards around, just in general, around 12.5 down to 12,000, which again, as I mentioned, is ironic because if Bitcoin goes down and continues to go lower, that's where it would go. And I feel like it's just a nice confluence of the decoupling happening, because if Bitcoin continues to go up, the New York Stock Exchange goes down, it would go down to the price range that Bitcoin would go down if it had gone down towards the downside. But here for XYO, again, not too much to update for these altcoins. They're obviously going to be similar to Bitcoin as they have been this entire time, and most of you should probably already be aware of, but we've just been going sideways ever since we broke out of the symmetrical triangle after this major move towards the upside, been entangling the 800 and the 200 EMA. We have seen the 200 EMA cross above here on this 4 hour, the 800 EMA, which again is a bullish thing to see here. We found some support along this right here. Since Bitcoin's seen a nice move towards the upside, XYO has moved up a little bit as well. We are seeing a borderline exaggerated bullish divergence, or my bad, no, hidden bullish divergence. It's one of those two, and in general, just some sort of a bullish deviation. I get those confused every now and then, and sometimes I don't remember them. But anyways, you can see if we go back to right here where this B price was lower, go where we currently are, and we see a positive slope from those two. But if we look at the RSI with these two bubbles lined up with so, right here we see a flat support. So basically what we're seeing there is, given the price was lower back here, but now the price is higher, and we've already, the RSI has gotten that oversold again, could very likely end up being a good thing. But again, like I said, I would take that with a grain of salt, because it's just a very subtle form of bullish deviation. We aren't seeing it on the stock RSI, nor are we actually, we are seeing it. Well, we're seeing a bullish divergence on this MACD, but the way that this MACD is, given that it's paired with the Bollinger Bands, and just with my time using it, that's also should be taken with a grain of salt. But I do believe that if we continue to go lower from here, we likely would meet this trend line right here if we went down significantly lower. I'll take another one to get a range right here. So about from right here, we would probably enter this area, which lines up roughly with, it's probably somewhere around like 0.0036 or so roughly. Just in general around 0.0038 down to around 0.003. So in general, approximately 0.004 to 0.003 would be likely where it would go, which lines up with the previous low. That would be if we see the bear trap for Bitcoin meeting Bitcoin's previous lows, and if Bitcoin takes another massive dump on us and goes even lower, then obviously XYO is going to go lower, which I'm not really going to entertain that right now. Pretty much the same story here for the XYO to Bitcoin chart. Again, as I said, we've seen a falling triangle or falling wedge instead of that symmetrical triangle for the USD chart. This is the 12-hour chart. We are seeing hidden bullish divergence. You can see the slope right here was positive, and the support down here for, well, the slope for the support right here is positive. The slope for the support right here on the RSI is negative. Seeing the same thing on the MACD as well, also the stock RSI. So hopefully that would end up being a good thing. Again, I would take that with a grain of salt right now. If we do continue to go lower, I'm not even going to mention that. I always do that for this chart, but then I realize this is the Bitcoin chart, and I'm not going to do the calculations right off the bat. But again, just to quickly and briefly mention it, I do believe once we continue to go back up for here, XYO will reach around $0.015 to 2.5 pennies, which is just what lines up with the previous main and pivotal consolidation, which lines up with Bitcoin when it consolidated from 32 to 48,000. So going here to Phantom, we saw this drop recently, so let's go ahead and point this out here. I believe, with respect to this fractal pattern, this area right here is what lines up with this, and we've seen this downside right here. So now we're about to go back towards the upside, assuming Bitcoin continues to go up, which is going to line up with a nice movement towards the upside for Phantom. We found support along this nice trend line range right here. You can see we got rejection, broke back above it, found support. So hopefully we won't continue to go lower. If we go lower here for Phantom, that likely would come down to this area right here in terms of potential support, which is what's going to line up pretty much again with this 800 EMA, or not this 8, that's 200, yeah, it is the 800 EMA, 800 estimating moving average, which again is just another good thing to see there as well. If you look at the RSI down here, we are pretty overextended right here with the price still being significantly lower with respect to the price right here going down back to the RSI. Again, everything I'm mentioning for the indicators I would take with a grain of salt right now, especially if we are in that bullish reversal that I've been mentioning when it comes to Bitcoin and the entire cryptocurrency market as a whole. If that genuinely is the case, the indicators essentially don't matter at this point because we've entered the next bull market, and it could continue to print many bearish divergences, but then along with that print hidden bullish divergences, which again, that's what the DXY did until it finally set its most recent top and has been going down ever since. It printed like a triple or quadruple bearish divergence, but what was leading it into the second, third, and fourth bearish divergence subsequently was the fact that it kept printing hidden bullish divergences. And a spree of bearish divergences, hidden bullish divergences will print to continue to further onto the second, third, and fourth, fifth, however many bearish divergences there is going to be. Again, I'm not actually not forget that thought. But anyways, here for JASMY, similar to Phantom, you can see we're finding support along essentially the same trend line support that I mentioned for Phantom, which is a good thing. If we continue to go lower, likely down to 0.0035 to 0.0045. If we continue, excuse me, I burped. I don't know if any of you heard that, but anyways, if we break up towards the upside here, this general range right here is, I believe, where we'll probably go next. We could completely overshoot that. We are pretty close to it already, and that wouldn't be that much of a move towards the upside, but this is also just what lines up with that consolidation with respect to Bitcoin going from 32 to 48,000. Again, we could completely overshoot that once more. Here for Theta, again, we're finding support along this trend line range right here, which is pretty much the same thing for JASMY and Phantom as I mentioned. And I believe we're kind of also similar to the Phantom fractal that I was using, lining up with this area right here. So hopefully we'll see a nice movement towards the upside soon. If we continue to go lower, again, Bitcoin sees a bear trap or sets newer lows in the coming like month or two. Bear trap, we can come down to around 90 to 95 cents. And if we make new market lows, I'm not even going to bother to entertain that right now, because if it happens, I'll get to it whenever it comes. But anyways, here for TRIAS. TRIAS has been behaving better than most of the coins, at least the ones that I've gone over so far. I mean, in general, it's just really looking really good right now. It hasn't really dumped as much as Bitcoin or the other coins have. It's broken out of this. I'm not even going to give it a pattern name because I don't really think it should be given that. But it's broken out of this range right here, this trading range that I've been going over recently. It's already hit its next range of possible break into, and then to find some sort of consolidation. If I had to guess, whenever we do see another break towards the upside, maybe it only pushed towards $7, and then it'll find consolidation or retracement within around like $6 or something like that. Maybe down to like $4.50 or so. Or again, maybe it'll completely overshoot that. If we come down, like it would come down to around $2.30. If lower, around $1.62 to around $1.86 or so. And if we break that, which is just lining up with this lowermost trend line, likely would come down to around $1.35, or maybe retest the lowest lows at around 80 cents, or even lower again, like I've been mentioning for every other coin and for Bitcoin going lower, if that is indeed what ends up happening. We are getting a bearish divergence though right here on the RSI, stock, and the MACD with respect to the price up here. We have a positive resistance, negative resistance on all three of these indicators. But we are seeing, actually, never mind, we aren't. So we could likely, I would watch out, maybe we come down and test around like $2.50 or so, perhaps, or maybe not at the end of the day, who knows. Here for Dogecoin, it, again, is just seeing a move towards the upside as Bitcoin did recently. It's pushing its last lifeline in terms of support right here. Again, this white range goes pretty much all the way back to the first low we set. If I take it to a higher time frame here, this white range goes all the way back to the previous low that we set for the what led into the parabolic movement last time. We're essentially right here in this area right before the next major upheaval, I believe. But going back down to this 4-hour chart, if we test the previous lows again, it's just going to line up with around 7 cents. We could come down to this trend line that I have drawn on here at around 6.5 cents or so. If it sets, actually that would go down like right down on this wick recently. So I mean, I would say worst case scenario, if Bitcoin just sees that bear trap to its previous lows, around 6.5 cents or so. As I said, for most of the other coins, I'm not going to entertain it if it continues to go lower and Bitcoin sets a new low, because if that happens, then well, we'll get to it when it gets there. But again, just to mention it, seeing Dogecoin break above 10 to 11 to 12 cents will be the next major thing to see. Likely we'll push up to that and then find some consolidation coming back down to around like 8, around like 9.5 to 10 cents, which is what would line up with finding support along right here, and then 10 cents going up to this area right here. But that wraps up the technical analysis part of this video. Again, I'm going to jump into this diagram right here that I have. So what I took was, so where it says up here in the top left, Everett-Rogers diffusion of innovation model. What that's basically meaning is, by diffusion, it should be pretty simply taken as it's the opposite of fusion. So when you fuse more than one thing together, whether it be 2, 3, up to infinity, you're going to fuse it into one thing. So multiplicity into a unification or a unity. It's the opposite here. So a diffusion is going to be one thing diversifying itself out into 2, 3, 4, so on into infinity. The analogy I'm going to use here is you think about an atom, or technically, given as I mentioned in multiple of my videos, I'm a polymath. Outside of this, I have a vast bubble of knowledge with respect to physics, mathematics, philosophy, psychology, biology, just about anything you come to, even down to religion, mainly the Bible, and I've looked at like pagan mythologies just because I want to learn about them, and for reasons going back more sort of the Bible to figure out what the actual truth is and things like that. But getting back to this, the analogy I'm going to use for diffusion is so if you think about in a pyrocron, which is my coinage for what an atom is, within an pyrocron you have electrons, and my coinage for what electrons actually are a pyrocrux. Even if you go back to J.J. Thomas, who discovered the electron, he didn't necessarily say it was a particle, a free-moving point-based particle. He actually said it was more accurately just a unit of dielectric induction. The people who give out the Nobel Peace, or just not the Nobel Peace Prize, but just a Nobel Prize when it comes to physics, kind of pressured him into saying that it was a point-based free particle, so he would get the Nobel Prize, etc. Because I mean, hopefully most of you realize that everything is politicized at this point when it comes to physics communities, mathematics communities, biology. It's sad that it has reached that point, but I mean that is just the sad truth. But so what you can think about here in terms of diffusion is so if you go to the periodic table of elements, you have an pyrocron of hydrogen all the way up to the largest one we found so far, which I think is 118 pyrocrux, or electrons within the pyrocron or atom itself. At most it can have 120 pyrocrux or electrons. Again, what an pyrocron actually is it's just a Hopf vibration, which is just a mathematical object, which in a layman's term you can think about as just as a ball of yarn. Just a complex looped knotted object. But basically, as a periodic table progresses and a pyrocron gets larger in terms of number of pyrocrux within it, it's diffusing from that singular unified point of singularity at the very center, which would be like a very center of a galaxy. A galaxy is also an pyrocron, and the universe is an pyrocron. The atom is just the smallest version of an pyrocron. Then you go to a galaxy, and then you go to the universe. It's all the same thing in a fractal-like self-similarity. in quotes, evolution from the microcosm to the macrocosm. But basically, again, like I said, from hydrogen to the last element, that singular point of singularity at the very center, when it's unified at one empirocrux, diffuses out into diversity of multiplicity to having multiple electrons or empirocrux throughout the various layers of the empirocron or hot vibration, or, like I said, ball of yarn. But now that I have that out of the way, how that's relating to this technology right here in the Bitcoin adoption curve, or just anything's adoption curve. So the one that more so lines up with Bitcoin is going to be this red one right here, and then you have this orange one. So you can think about, I mean, technically this red one is this orange one as well, because if you think about it, if let's say this red one continues out not farther, say past where you can see it at now currently, let's say whatever this red curve is according to product-wise, let's say it's Blockbuster. So we could say Blockbuster adhered perfectly to this orange one because it reached a peak point and then it completely died off. For all we know, whatever product pertains to this red curve going out further than what this graph shows, it's going to die off soon and then essentially become this orange curve. But taking this red curve as it is right here, this is in accordance to an S-curve or a sigmoidal function. And this is what Bitcoin is likened to in terms of its adoption rate, because Bitcoin is likely, well, not just Bitcoin, but especially in terms of source of value, monetary and currency-based things, and especially in terms of technology when it goes into the larger, broader realm of blockchain solutions and how that literally applies to every single aspect of our day-to-day lives in terms of peer-to-peer social interaction and the cohesion of a society or the coming global society, which is an unfortunate thing. Again, if you're not informed about the World Economic Forum, the Davos Bilderberg Group, organizations like that and what they're trying to do, I recommend getting informed on it because it's not good at all. But again, to get back to this, so taking the red curve to be the Bitcoin adoption rate, let's say, and I'm going to hypothesize here, I don't think it's even hypothetical at this point, I think it's pretty clear that blockchain is going to be the last evolution when it comes to society and technology in general. I think we are definitely reaching the singularity point in terms of the climax of human technological innovation and essentially the end of the world. I only think there's, well, I mean, in all honesty, I think there's only about roughly 7 years left. I don't think we're going to be here for much longer. In the past, I said at most 50, and I said at most 50 because I was trying to be lenient, but at this point, I genuinely believe there's only about 7 years left. So that being said, Bitcoin's going to reach, because of how pivotal of a technological innovation is, it's likely just going to reach a plateau point, and it like literally would just flatline because it's the final innovation, and I highly doubt anything will replace it. So that goes over the two. So the orange and the red curves are adoption curves. Again, Blockbuster would be something to put on the orange curve, and again, the red curve would be something like Bitcoin. Such a technological innovation that it never dies out and it just reaches a point of climax and this plateaus or flat lines for the rest of its existence, or maybe it ends up dying out at some point, or maybe even, let's say, like for example, taking this orange curve, it's Blockbuster is completely dead. Let's say for whatever reason in the next like year or two, Blockbuster comes out with this major innovation and Blockbuster goes from being down here at 0 and it makes another peak at some point. Maybe it dies again, or like it plateaus or something like that. So when it comes to the Bitcoin adoption, I believe we're about somewhere right here within this area in the end of the early adopters reaching into the early majority phase. So there's still a lot of adoption to go, but we're about to reach that point to where it's about to see the most upheaval and most change in the acceleration of this curve right here towards the upside. So this one that I have down here, so this blue one, this is basically the Bitcoin price. This is just a logarithmic curve. Again, I'm going to go back to the actual Bitcoin chart here. I'm pretty sure most of you are aware of, I mean, as you can see down here, most of you would probably likely look at your charts on the log scale because it's just it's just the best way to look at it. This is obviously As I mentioned, Bitcoin has a logarithmic trajectory. It's logarithmically decaying, which is why we see lengthening cycles and the diminishment in terms of returns of the bear markets going towards the downside. It's lessening over time, and the bear markets going towards the upside are also lessening over time. But again, we can see here how this blue curve clearly lines up with Bitcoin and its price projection over time, which, just to briefly go over it, which I mentioned this in my blockchain tech breakdown video. Again, it's going to be linked as a card at the end of this video. But this logarithmic progression of Bitcoin over time is directly tied to the mathematics of Bitcoin. And also, again, like I said, the halving of Bitcoin. Again, the halving happens, it's in terms of the mining process of the proof of work for Bitcoin. People that are mining are solving complex mathematical equations. The person who solves it adds the next block to the total blockchain of transactions, the ledger for Bitcoin over time, and they get rewarded Bitcoin for solving that block. It started out as 50, went to 25, went to 12.5, then we're currently on 6.25 Bitcoin reward for the solving of a block and its complex mathematical puzzle, basically. So that's why we're actually seeing this drop off over time in association with a logarithmic, because of the way it's tied to the halving. As I said, in the mathematics, we're getting less return from the blocks over time, like we're getting less bullish returns in our cycles towards the upside, and again also towards the downside. There's also a theory of hyper-Bitcoinization when it comes to Bitcoin's price, which basically the price of Bitcoin would look like the sigmoidal function, so this red one, but obviously it would be more in a logarithmic sense because Bitcoin's taking on a logarithmic progression. So imagine this with this logarithmic curve. We're going out, we're plateauing, but at some point we're going to start to go towards the upside. So what you would do is you would take the inverse. So if you were to flip this blue curve and mirror it upwards, and then you would then bring it out to where it would start to then go back. This going up here would start to curve upwards with the same curve that it did right here, but again, like I said, towards the upside. So basically it would be like a logarithmic version, a more drawn out version of this red one right here. So hopefully you get that picture that I was trying to paint there. I know it can be a little confusing, but again, to touch back on the halving, it has to happen. It's directly associated with the fact why Bitcoin over time continually gets more scarce, especially with the fact of when it comes to miners themselves, because over time with the halvings associated with the mathematics of the technology, the miners are getting rewarded less and less. Again, which, just to continue to reiterate, it is why we are getting this logarithmic progression, and why I believe we won't actually get that logarithmic sigmoid curve. I believe Bitcoin will continue just to progress logarithmically like this, and essentially it's starting to reach that plateau point. I would say we are probably about right here in this general area that I'm circling with my cursor for Bitcoin's price. We're about to really start to enter that kind of like sluggish side, more so sideways, but still increasing towards the upside phase for Bitcoin. I mean, we're, especially with the next cycle, because as I've been mentioning, we're only about halfway through the third cycle for Bitcoin. Just to quickly go over it, obviously from inception to right here in 2011, this was the first cycle, more so adhering to starting from about right here. You see 1 peak, 2 peaks, 3 peaks, 4 peaks. So then again, right from 2011 to 2017 would be the second cycle. We see 1 peak, 2 peak, 3 peak, 4 peaks, and then right here from this fourth peak of 2017, right here we'd see 1 peak, 2, and then this next bull market would be the third one. And then we would enter the second phase of the cycle, which would be, we'll see a fractal self-similar repetition of what we saw from 2013 to 2017. Then we'll make our fourth peak of our current cycle 3 sometime around 2030 to 2032. But as I just got done saying, I don't think the world's going to be here, at least the world that we know now. Again, just to reiterate it, if you like haven't noticed my intro for this channel, there's 2 Bible verses under it. If you haven't gone and read them, again, I'm not trying to push this on anybody. At the end of the day, this is my channel. I'm going to say what I want to say. Click away if you don't like what I'm saying. Feel free to unsubscribe. I don't care. But I suggest and recommend all of you get to know the Bible, that you get to know the Holy Spirit that wrote that book, that you come to terms and you accept Christ Jesus, Yahweh Yahushua HaMashiach, into your heart, that you be baptized in his name, that you may receive the gift of the Holy Spirit, because there's not much time left at all. And you don't want to have eternal torment. Your soul, you do not want to have eternal torment whatsoever by any means. But that pretty much wraps up what I wanted to go over in this video. Hopefully you all enjoyed. Hopefully you were to take something away from this content, especially what I just got done mentioning about the utter truth of the Bible. Outside of that, everything being said, I hope you all have a blessed day.
Ooh, I'm regretting now, won't die. See you forever, such a long